Hi, it's Jane, and I've started working on another hat for Operation Christmas Child, and I thought I would just sit and talk with you a little bit while I'm crocheting. And I am using Umbaqa's hat. This is the Umbaqa Design Crochet, and it is I believe it's called the Simple Double Crochet Hat. Simple Double Crochet Hat pattern. So, that's what I use for a lot of my patterns. Anytime I have done hats for the newborns, if they weren't, some hats that the nursery or the people at the hospital had picked out, if they just asked for something general, then normally I would have used this pattern and then decorated it up like, pastel colors with some Easter appliques, like a bunny or putting bunny ears on the top or, something like that. That's what I've done in the past for the nursery. For Thanksgiving, we'd make turkey hats, which you make a little waddle for the turkey and like a beak and, some kind of feathers off to the side, and it works out. So, they come out looking great. So this is a great pattern. It goes from preemie all the way up to, I think, adult extra large, or at least an adult large. Extra large, you can figure out how to add a few more stitches to that, so that your basic round that you start decreasing, just doing the normal crochet around for the hats. Like if she goes up 4 stitches per size, then you would just somehow add another 4 stitches in that next pattern. The next row up, so that when you're making it that extra large, got a little bit more room. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing. A couple of days. Did finish another hat. I am using the leftover skein that I had from creating my shawl. That is the spring garden shawl, and I am using that what is it, swirl? Sweet roll in the color Blueberry Hill. So I am finishing up that roll by finishing up trying to make a couple hats for Operation Christmas Child. I don't know about you, but the fall always the sinuses give me. The oak gets me, and some of the fall smells get me, and they just get my sinuses acting up like crazy. Have had a sinus headache for the past week, and I know it's a sinus headache, and I've done all the things, where they tell you to do this and do this, and around here, massage it down, all that fun stuff. Down in here, all that. Still hasn't cleared it. But it's okay. It's just another season. I'll get through it. But yeah, it's been an interesting week. Told you that I'd gone for the deposition and some of the strange questions he was asking. The lawyer had called me into his office today to talk with me, and he had suggested trying to see about a reverse mortgage so that we could perhaps make a settlement with the gentleman, the contractor. And he said he's asking for $213, and I said I ain't willing to give him $213. And during some of the questions, they had asked me, if I had looked into the cost of building a house like this. And the original house that I had chosen, the cost were approximately $411, and that was complete through a company. End of story. And that was with me choosing cabinetry and all that stuff and everything around. So, I get enough stitches in there. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. Yep. So, the lawyer and I kind of talked about a roundabout figure that I'd be willing to settle with, and that's always fun. So we're looking at, reverse mortgage, see if we can do that. And, he said, how many years do you think you would live in this house conceivably? I said, I don't know, maybe 20. That's what I would hope for. At least 15 to get to my 80s. And so we talked a little bit about that kind of thing. So I'm going to look into it. I don't have a lot of high hopes for it, but we'll see. Short of that, I'm having sugar daddy tryouts for the next 2 weeks, and make sure you bring your bank account statement and any holdings you might have, and your best gray pants, sweatpants. I'm kidding, folks. Sometimes you just kind of have to laugh about the way things are going. So that's been rather interesting. We had a craft day at the church, which was Sunday, and the main person that was doing all this was sick. She wasn't there. My cohort was sick, so she wasn't there. The other gal that would have been helping me was in a lot of pain, went home early, and so I was the only one left to handle things. And I think we had about 5 to 6 people that stopped in to help for a little bit, and then they all left about 45 minutes later. So wasn't too bad. Didn't last all afternoon, so I just gathered up the rest of the t-shirts, brought them home, and got them all cut and made into t-shirt yarn. And now the next couple of days I will be putting them into what I call rope kits. Basically, I will be measuring out a certain length of each color, going ahead and starting the tie over for the first part of the jump rope, and then that all that's left is for someone to come along and to help braid that. So that's what my plans are, and we're supposed to be having another craft night Thursday night. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's been, interesting. We've been having fun doing a lot of things, and a lot of it is items come in when we aren't there, because church is used almost every day by an organization or a group of people, and lots of times they'll bring in donations, those kind of things. So we've just been trying to keep those sorted into areas so we knew what they were, where they needed to go for when we have our packing party for the OCC. So that's what we've been doing. Other than that, the cats have been ornery, I will say. They've knocked over this water bowl of theirs, I want to say 4 times this week. And I am about ready to take that water bowl up during the night, and because that seems to be when they're roughhousing through here, and they slam into it and send it spinning. I don't know what else to do with it, so there's that. We had at our church yesterday, there was we have what we call a luncheons, Veterans Day luncheon. One of the gals works at Penn State, and so she arranges for the pastry chef to make this beautiful cake for the ceremonies, and I'll put a picture up here. Let me tell you, it was made by the pastry chef at Penn State College, and half of it was chocolate with a chocolate filling in it. The other half was white with raspberry filling, and it had buttercream icing. It was very rich and decadent. Now, one of our gentlemen in the group cooked the meal, and the meal it's a very simple meal, and that's a lot of things that we do at our church. We do usually simple meals for each group, each round, that kind of thing. So he had prepared was green beans with potatoes and pieces of ham in it, soup. It was really good. And the funny thing is, he makes a killer chili. But when he makes it for the group, he makes it as hot as he does when he makes it at home. So when I was going through the line, I'd asked him, I said, you didn't make it too hot today, did you? And he started laughing. He goes, no, I was thinking about, making a pot of that. I said, that's funny because I was thinking about a pot of this, followed by a pot of the chili that you make. And he just laughed. He goes, well, if I see you, I'll bring you a big container full of chili and leave it there in the church refrigerator for you. And I just laughed because, he doesn't have to do that, but lots of times he will make big, and I mean huge batches of these things, and he will bring in containers and leave them in the church so that if someone, like if there's a call for a meal for a family or someone that's just had a baby or is, family members in the hospital, you want to help out the family. Lots of times that's there in the freezer or the refrigerator so that can be taken to them, or he will put it in his own freezer and let them know, that they need something to let him know, and he'll bring that down for the meals, for the meal train. So, and that's always been a blessing to a lot of people, having that meal train available, to help others in needs. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Like, this was not what I would call a big fancy to do for our veterans. It was a Veterans Day luncheon, but it was nice and very comfortable, and got to learn about more of our folks that were in our area, that in our church, that were military, and got to hear their stories about, their different, what they call them now, campaigns now, or their different deployments. So that was very interesting to get to listen to some of those things and hear their stories about those. And also to hear the Air Force, the Army, there was only one Marine in the group, and the Navy talk about their meals, about the difference between if you were regular enlisted infantry up to some of the higher echelon, the difference in those meals. And as they put it, generally those folks can cook. So, that was just interesting to hear those stories and see that little bit of one-upsmanship of each other, and of course our one Marine, they went around the room announcing you know, what they did, what kind of job they had in the military, you know, and he was a arms specialist, Green Beret, and not Green Beret, Navy, not Navy SEAL, what do the Marines call them? Trying to think of what it was. It's like the Navy SEALs and Green Beret specialist. But anyway, after he announced his name, you know, he did the hoorah, and that was kind of fun to hear. So, and we had a couple of people that had heard about the luncheon that were veterans that walked in and joined the meal, which is always nice to get to meet new people, you know, in your neighborhood that you've seen around and you don't know them. So that was nice to get to meet a couple of new folks that way. And of course, there were some of us there that were just there to support our veterans and to learn more about what they had done in their life and, you know, what they followed up once they got out of the service, those kind of things. And it's always interesting, you know. And then, of course, a couple of us sat and talked about our lives and, you know, some of the things that we had. And of course, my dad was Air Force, so, you know, they picked my brain about what he did when he was in the Air Force and how I got to be where I landed in Roswell, New Mexico. And of course, I told them the story about my father. My mother and father met when they were in the military. Mother was working as a secretary for the Air Force, and they were in Massachusetts when he met her. My mother had had a previous marriage where her husband was died in a motorcycle accident, leaving her with a 2-year-old, which was my older sister. So these two met, fell in love, and of course she followed him wherever he went, you know. When he was overseas, he was sent to Africa, and I can't remember where else he was sent to overseas. They stuck together that long, and he'd been in the military quite some time. And then he got, you know, he's like, I'm ready to retire, so of course he retired. I had about 21 years, I think, and then they were looking for a place to go to, and my mother had some severe asthma, was a type 1 diabetic, and so they had decided, they'd visited a couple of places, and they had kind of decided to go for Flagstaff, Arizona area. And so my father applied for a job with the Arizona State Police, and he failed the lie detector test. And, you know, he swears to this day, well, he's passed away a couple of years ago, but he swore until his death that the reason he failed the lie detector test is because he hated his middle name. And of course, on the lie detector test, they ask you for your full name. And he had to say his middle name, and it caused him stress. So he failed the lie detector test because the person that was reading it determined that he was lying about his name. So then their second choice, of course, was Roswell, New Mexico. You know, and then we talked about, you know, me growing up in New Mexico and knowing some of the main people that were part of the UFO story that hit there. I had one woman tell me that she thinks it was simply satanic happenings that were going on. And I said, well, I don't know that. I don't know that God did not make different species on different planets. I do know that on our planet, he made us in his image, but he may not have done that on other planets. Who knows? But I was telling one of the folks that asked me, you know, if I knew any of the people that were involved, and I had told them, well, the gentleman, Marcel, I took care of him as a candy striper quite often on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons, I would sit with him, read with him, talk with him, and even to his dying day, he claimed that he had actually seen those things, and I don't doubt him. Do I know that what he saw was alien? No, but I don't doubt what he was telling me, what he saw. So, and of course I knew Sheriff Glenn Dennis. He was a gentleman that was working at the Blair Funeral Home, or not Blair, Blaine Funeral Home. And he was supposedly, when the night of the crash, when they gathered the little beings that were left, he was called to bring out several child-size coffins for them to be placed into, to be shipped to another area. And he did so, and supposedly he actually saw one of those alien beings. Now, I knew him through his son, and when we would go on these camping trips together, which there were quite a few of us, male, females, teenagers, that would go on these camping trips with his dad and his mom and, a couple of other adults. Wasn't quite church, but it was very well chaperoned camping trips. Around the campfire, he would always tell us about the aliens and what he saw, and of course most of us at that time, teenagers, thought he was just trying to tell us some scary story and try to scare us in the night. But who knows? But yeah, it was just rather interesting to get to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, he wanted to know how I wound up at Lock Haven. So I told him about that. And a couple of people on the table wanted to know how I landed in the church that I was now going to. And I just told them that I had been going to this other church because my husband was Presbyterian, and he was wanting to continue to stick with the Presbyterian church. So he had chosen going to that church, and but the church, it wasn't what I would call fulfilling my spiritual need. There were occasional Bible studies, but they weren't in depth into the Bible. Pastor did not teach from the Bible very often. Many times when you came in, her sermons were around somewhat Christian principles, but they were always stories that were about different things, and she always does the same story every season. Certain stories she does every season, every year. On those dates, she does a certain story, and they were the same thing over and over every year. At that one church, I was deacon, and we were talking about her sermons, and she made a comment that the elders only allowed her to have a sermon that was 20 to 30 minutes long because they all needed to go for lunch afterwards. Need to answer this. Okay, sorry about that. So, I told them all that, but I didn't feel my spiritual needs were being met. My friend and I had talked about it, and we both were talking along the same lines. So we started doing what we called church hopping, which was basically visiting different churches during their services, during Sunday school services, those kind of things, looking for a new home church. Well, and we finally decided at one point that, let's go to Big Woods Bible Church. We walked into the church and we were welcomed by a lot of people. They asked our name. They wanted to get to know us. Of course, we knew a couple of people that were there because we've gone to Christian women with them for years, those kind of things. So that was kind of neat, But I've never had a church where people actively walked up to you, wanted to know your name, wanted to know your story, what was going on with you, whether you were saved, whether you believed, all that kind of thing. So it was a very welcoming church when we first walked in. And sat down, they did couple of worship songs, they did announcements, they did a few more worship songs, and then they got into the meat of the sermon. And the first thing the pastor asked was for everyone to get out their Bible and turn to whatever we were studying. And we kind of looked at each other at that point, and I looked over to her and I said, I think I'm home. And by the time we got through with the end of that service and went to the Sunday school service, we had determined that we were home. This was our home church for now. So I'd asked the other folks how they got to be at this church, because this church was originally founded through New Life Ministries at the university. The students had started this church, and there were many people that met with them, and for a long time they met at the whiIe. They met at one church until they kind of threw them out or sold the building. I don't remember what it was. And then for a long time they were what they called, if you can find us, you can worship with us. They would meet at parks. They would meet at someone's house. They would meet all these different places until they had finally raised enough money to buy an old school building in Castanea. And they used that church for many years, but eventually it got to be where they were quickly outgrowing the church, and I believe they were having to have 3 church services a day, on Sundays, because it wasn't big enough to hold everybody. So they started looking for another building. And of course, they found this building, and they went and they asked the people who owned the building, what they wanted for it, and they wanted like 1.4 million. And they said, well, we have the 0.4, but we don't have the million. And the elders kept saying, pastor kept saying, maybe we should go work on some more fundraisers, go look for something different, look for a loan for the 1 million for this church, for this building turned into the church. And the elders kept saying, no, we're going to pray about it. We're going to pray about it. And I think they said 1 or 1.5 years later, the people that had the building came to them and basically told them, we'll give it to you for that 0.4 that you have. So they did that. They renovated. It used to be an old auto warehouse. They renovated it, and it is a beautiful church. So, it was interesting to get to